We are the vanguard of a new era in digital storytelling, where technology and emotion finally become one. Experience the future of cinema through our neon-lit narratives and metallic, high-contrast visuals. Join the movement today. Hit that subscribe button and stay ahead of the curve. My son-in-law didn't just humiliate my daughter in front of 200 people. He smiled while he did it. I've been turning that moment over in my mind for months now, and I still can't find the word that fits what I felt when I watched his face. Not anger, not surprise, something colder than both of those. Recognition, maybe. The kind that settles into your chest when you realize the thing you feared most has finally shown its true face, and you were the only one in the room who was ready for it. My daughter's name is Caroline. She's 34 years old, and she has her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness, and she has always been the kind of person who believes the best about people until they give her no other choice. That quality made her a wonderful teacher. It also made her an easy target for a man like my son-in-law. His name is Derek. I'll say that plainly because he's earned having his name attached to what I'm about to tell you. I met Derek 3 years before the graduation. Caroline brought him to Thanksgiving dinner, and I remember watching him work the room, shaking hands with her uncles, complimenting her aunt's cooking, asking me thoughtful questions about my years working in civil engineering. He was polished in the way that some men are polished, smooth where the edges should have been. I smiled and passed him the rolls and said nothing, because Caroline was happy, and a father learns when to speak and when to observe. Her mother, God rest her, would have seen it too. Margaret passed 6 years ago, and there are moments too many to count when I feel the specific weight of her absence. She had a gift for reading people that I always admired and occasionally resented. She would have pulled Caroline aside before the second dinner and said something gentle but precise, the way she always did. But Margaret was gone, and I was doing my best to be both parents at once, and my best sometimes fell short. Caroline and Derek got engaged after 18 months. By then I had a list of small things that I kept to myself. The way he'd finish her sentences in a way that wasn't affectionate but corrective. The way he'd reference her salary in mixed company with a little laugh, as if her work as a teacher was charming rather than important. The way he looked at her when she disagreed with him in public, not angry, not yet. Just a flicker of something that said, "We'll discuss this later." I am not a man who acts on suspicion alone. I watched. I waited. I started making plans. The first plan was the house. Caroline had always wanted to own her own home. We talked about it since she was in her 20s. She'd clip listings from real estate websites and text them to me with little comments. "This one has a porch, Dad. This one has a yard for a dog." When Derek came into the picture, those texts slowed down and then stopped. I asked her about it once and she said Derek preferred to rent for now, that he didn't like to be tied down to one place. She said it the way people say things they've rehearsed until they believe them. 2 years before the graduation, I started working with a real estate attorney named Patricia. Patricia had handled Margaret's estate, and she was the kind of woman who asked the right questions and didn't flinch at the answers. I told her what I wanted to do. I wanted to purchase a home and place it in a trust sole ownership, Caroline's name only, legally structured so that no future spouse could claim it in a divorce, no creditor could touch it, no one could take it from her without her consent. Patricia raised an eyebrow and said, "You've thought about this carefully." I said I'd had time. We found a property in a small town about 40 minutes from where Caroline was teaching. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch, a yard that was big enough for a dog and small enough to manage alone. I paid cash, which took most of what I had saved beyond my retirement. I signed the papers on a Thursday in March, and I drove out to the property afterward and sat in the car in the driveway for a long time, looking at the front door, thinking about Margaret. I want to be clear about something. I did not do this because I had given up on Caroline's marriage. I did it because I had given up on the idea that love alone keeps a person safe. Margaret taught me that. She'd watched her own sister spend 11 years in a marriage that chipped away at her piece by piece, and she used to say that the cruelest thing about that kind of situation was how it took your options away one at a time, so slowly you didn't notice until you looked around one day and found yourself with nothing left to stand on. I was not going to let that happen to my daughter. I told no one, not Caroline's brother, not Patricia's assistant, not my neighbor Frank, who is my closest friend, and who would have approved wholeheartedly, and also would have told someone within a week. The envelope went into the fireproof safe in my study, and I went back to watching and waiting. The graduation was Caroline's. She had been working toward her master's degree for 4 years, taking classes 2 nights a week and on Saturday mornings while she taught full-time. She'd started the program before she met Derek, and he had never made it easy for her. There were dinners she had to miss. Weekends when she was writing papers instead of doing whatever he had planned. I heard about the friction in small pieces. The way you hear about a storm through other people's accounts. A comment here. A silence there. The way her voice sounded tired, in a particular way when I called on Sunday nights. She finished in May. The ceremony was held at the university's main hall, a big limestone building with tall windows that let in the afternoon light in long slanted columns. I arrived early and found my seat and watched people fill the room around me. Derek arrived with his parents about 10 minutes before it started. His mother's name was Roberta. His father was Gerald. I had met them perhaps a dozen times over the years, and each time I came away feeling like I'd been assessed and found acceptable but not impressive, which was fine because I had assessed them too and arrived at my own conclusions. Roberta sat next to me. She was a tall woman with careful hair and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been correcting other people's posture for years. She asked me how the drive down had been. I told her it was fine. She told me it was a shame the ceremony was so long, that these things always ran late, that she hoped they'd at least have decent food at the reception after. I agreed that it was a long drive and said nothing about the food. Caroline walked across the stage in the third group. I stood up when her name was called, which I knew was not strictly done, and I didn't care. She looked out into the audience and found me and smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had at her high school graduation. 17 years old and uncertain and hopeful, and I had to press my lips together and look at the ceiling for a second. The reception was at a restaurant Derek had chosen. Private room, round tables, white tablecloths, the kind of place where everything on the menu was described in 3 words and cost $40. I sat across from Caroline and next to her colleague from school, a young woman named Priya who had been in the audience and who was clearly genuinely happy for her. Derek sat at the head of the table because Derek always sat at the head of whatever table he was at. The speeches started after the appetizers. Priya went first and said warm, specific things about Caroline that made the table laugh and then go quiet in a good way. Caroline's brother called in on video from Portland and said the things a younger brother says, which were imperfect and sincere and right. Then Gerald stood up, Derek's father, and made a toast that was technically about Caroline but was actually about Derek, about what a patient man Derek had been, how supportive, how he'd encouraged her, how we're so proud of how Derek has handled these last 4 years. I watched Caroline's face while Gerald spoke. She kept smiling. She had learned to keep smiling. Then Derek stood up. I want to describe this precisely, because precision matters here. Derek stood up, buttoned his jacket, held his glass, and looked at Caroline with an expression that was almost fond. He said he wanted to say a few words about his wife's achievement. He said 4 years was a long time. He said marriage required sacrifice, that he'd made plenty of his own. He said, and this is the part I want you to hear clearly, he said. Now that she's got her degree, maybe she can put it on the shelf next to her other decorations and get back to taking care of the home the way she used to. He laughed. His father laughed. Roberta smiled at the tablecloth. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something has happened that no one knows how to respond to yet. Caroline's smile didn't fall. It just froze. Her eyes went to her plate. Priya, to her credit, said "oh," which was small but honest. I watched my daughter's shoulders drop by about half an inch, which was a thing I had seen before, a slow deflation that I had been watching happen to her over 3 years, and something in me went very still. I stood up. I don't think I planned to stand up at that exact moment, but I was standing, and people were looking at me, and Derek was still smiling, and I had an envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket that I had carried there for the last 4 weeks, waiting for the right moment. And this was the moment. I said, before we move on, I'd like to say something. I did not look at Derek. I looked at Caroline. I said, your mother would have been here today. She would have been the loudest person in that auditorium, and she would have embarrassed you completely, and you would have loved every second of it. She would have wanted me to tell you what I'm about to tell you, so I'm telling you for both of us. Caroline looked up from her plate. I said, 4 years ago, you started something hard. You worked 2 nights a week and every Saturday morning while you taught 30 kids 5 days a week. And you did not quit. And you did not ask anyone to slow down for you. And tonight, you finished. That is not a decoration. That is not something to put on a shelf. That is who you are. I reached into my jacket and took out the envelope. I said, I have something for you. I'd like you to open it now. She looked at the envelope the way people look at things they're not sure they're allowed to want. Derek's smile had gone somewhere I couldn't read. Roberta had stopped looking at the tablecloth. Caroline took the envelope. She opened it carefully, the way she'd always opened presents, which drove her brother crazy when they were kids because he was a ripper and she was a peeler, and she unfolded the papers inside, and she started to read. I watched her face move through the words. Confusion first, then a slow widening of her eyes. Then she put her hand over her mouth, and when she looked up at me, there were tears running down both her cheeks, and I nodded at her, and she looked back down at the papers. Priya leaned over, and Caroline tilted the papers toward her, and Priya looked at them and then looked at me, and then looked at Caroline and said, quietly, "Caroline." I said, "It's yours, only yours." Patricia made sure of that. "There's nothing anyone can do to take it from you, and there's no signature required from anyone in this room." The table was very quiet. Derek said, "What is that? Not a question, really. A demand wearing the clothes of a question." I looked at him then, for the first time since I'd stood up. I said, "That's a deed to a house, in Caroline's name, in an irrevocable trust, with sole ownership and full legal protection. It's been sitting in a safe in my study for 2 years." He stared at me. I said, "A man who loves his wife gives her safety, not a shorter leash." I sat down. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Priya began to clap. Just her, just quiet, and Caroline laughed through her tears. And her brother had apparently been watching on his phone the whole time because a notification came up on the table from him that was just a string of exclamation points. Derek sat back down. His face had gone through several things quickly and arrived somewhere flat and careful. Gerald was looking at his water glass. Roberta had a fixed expression that I recognized from courtrooms and hospital waiting rooms, the expression of someone processing news they can't immediately contest. The rest of the dinner was brief. Caroline held the papers in her lap for the rest of the meal. She kept looking down at them, touching the corner of the top page, like checking that they were still there. Priya stayed close to her. I ate my dinner and answered questions from Caroline's colleague on my left, and kept half my attention on my daughter. Derek left before dessert. He said he had an early morning. He kissed Caroline on the top of her head in a way that looked like punctuation and walked out, and Gerald and Roberta followed a few minutes later with handshakes and careful smiles. After the restaurant, Caroline walked with me to my car. It was a cool night, and the parking lot was half empty, and the lights made long orange reflections on the wet pavement. She said, "Dad, how long have you been planning this?" I said, "Long enough." She said, Did you know? Did you know it was going to be like this?" I thought about Margaret. I thought about her sister. I thought about the Sunday night phone calls where Caroline's voice had a particular tired quality that I had learned to recognize. I said, "I hoped I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong, but I wanted you to have somewhere to stand no matter what." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He locked me out of the savings account last year. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry." I stood very still. She said, "I didn't have a credit card in my own name. He said we didn't need to." I said, "Do you have one now?" She said yes. She'd opened one 3 months ago, quietly, from her work email. She said she'd been thinking for a while. She just hadn't known where she would go. I said, "Now you know." She cried again, just briefly, and then she stopped the way her mother used to stop decisively, like closing a door. She held the papers against her chest with both arms. She asked me if Patricia could recommend a family attorney. I said Patricia had already written down 3 names on the back of the envelope, and that the first one had been expecting her call for 2 years. She laughed at that. A real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in a while. The kind that belonged to the girl who used to text me house listings with little notes about the porch and the yard. I drove home with the windows down. It was May, and warm enough for that, and the roads were quiet, and I thought about Margaret the whole way. I thought about what she would have said. I thought she would have said I took too long, and she would have been right, and I would have agreed with her. And then she would have taken my hand and said, "But you got there," the way she always did when I was being hard on myself about something. I got there. In the months that followed, Caroline filed for divorce. It was not easy, and it was not fast. Derek contested things that Patricia's referral handled with calm, methodical precision. He tried twice to involve the house. Both times, the trust documentation ended the conversation before it started. Caroline moved in on a Saturday in August with Priya's help and a rented truck and her dog, a 3-year-old rescue mutt named Archie, who apparently had opinions about every room and approved strongly of the yard. She called me that evening from the porch. She said, "Dad, you have to come see this sunset." I said I would come that weekend. She said, "The porch is exactly right. It's exactly what I always wanted." I said I knew. She said, "How did you know what size porch?" I said her mother told me, which wasn't exactly true and also wasn't exactly false. She'd sent me a listing 4 years ago with the note, "This one has a porch." Dad and I had saved it in a folder on my phone and driven out to the property 3 weeks later and stood in the driveway for a long time looking at the front door. There are things I would tell other fathers, if they ask me. I would tell them that watching your child is different from protecting your child, and both are necessary, and knowing which one the moment calls for is the whole job. I would tell them that money spent on your child's safety is not money spent, it's time purchased, options created, doors left open. I would tell them that the small things are not small. The way a man finishes your daughter's sentences, the way he talks about her work, the way her shoulders drop by half an inch at a dinner table and she learns to keep smiling. I would tell them to make the plan before they need the plan. I would tell them that love is not only what you say at a restaurant in front of 200 people, it's the papers in the fireproof safe that no one knows about, the attorney's number written on the back of an envelope, the house with the right-sized porch. I would tell them, do not wait to be right. Wait to be ready. And then act. Caroline texted me a photo that first evening. The porch, late light coming through the trees. Archie lying flat across the welcome mat with his legs stretched out like he'd been there for years. She put one caption under it. Home. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I put my phone down and walked out to the backyard and looked up at the sky for a while, the way I sometimes do when I want to talk to Margaret and don't have the words yet. I think she heard me anyway. She always did.